Good morning and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bonds, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Ryan, who is co-founder and CEO of Threeflow. Ryan, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm always I always start with the morning because we release it in the morning. It's don't want to ruin the magic, but it's certainly not morning where I am. I'm assuming is it morning where you are? Where are you joining us from today?
It is. I am in Seattle, and so it is decidedly morning where there's a 3- and 5-year-old about ready to run out the door to make their way to school. So it's a nice morning in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, nice. We're not going to have any small people join us on the podcast. We haven't done that yet. We're 100 episodes in.
There's always a first. Maybe if we slid it up a little bit earlier, we would have had a shot. They're 1 foot out the door at this point, but a little bit earlier, the high probability that would have happened.
I'm looking forward to that. We've had many Amazon deliveries. We've had many random animals come into picture, but weirdly, we're nearly 100 episodes, and we've not had a single small child, which is very disappointing. But anyway, I'm digressing massively about podcasts. Thank you for joining us. But as we traditionally like to do on the Leadership in Insurance podcast, it'd be really kind if you could introduce yourself and the Threeflow business of what it is that you guys do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you said, Ryan Sachtjen, co-founder and CEO of Threeflow. We live in the employee benefit insurance industry, and fundamentally what we do is help employee benefit brokers and employee benefit carriers work together more deeply and collaborate in spirit of driving better outcomes for employers. That's a US-based focus in terms of our business, but we've been really excited in terms of the progress we've been able to make to date in helping drive that initiative forward and helping to bring some modern solutioning to how these really key stakeholders can work together more effectively at a simple basis. And that's something as a core charter of what we do is how do we connect these threads together so that the outcomes can be improved. And we're really excited about the progress we've made.
Okay, amazing. I always I'm sort of interested to sort of dig into background recently. So you're from the insurance industry, aren't you? Prior to this, in the benefit space, presumably. Otherwise, it's a wild stab in the dark.
I was. That was how I grew up in the employee benefit business, and I knew and understood the dynamics between how these two sort of constituencies work together. And so I was on the supply side, so to speak, on the carrier side, and I worked in the employee benefit marketplace for a little over 12 years, working very deeply in this space and working with a number of different, brokerage entities where you have really large multi-billion-dollar firms, and you have smaller, 2-3 person individual consulting firms, and fundamentally the way in which the insurance carriers operate and work with the brokerage side was not that much different. And so what we saw was a real opportunity to help these two key stakeholders in the whole process work together more effectively.
Does that suggest that your sorts of technology, there's almost a sort of democratization of that opportunity? Because big carriers are set up really efficiently to work with big brokers because they bring them so much business, but kind of putting in some technology that makes that relationship work in sort of the same way universally, does it democratize the industry to some extent, do you think?
I think it democratizes the exchange of information more fundamentally, right? And so how they're ultimately going to succeed as an entity, you give them that tooling. And so there may still be delineation between top performing firms and those that maybe are in the middle from a growth and revenue standpoint. What we believe is that there should be more of a democratization in terms of how the information flows. It shouldn't be so gated. And right now, the employee benefit business is very siloed in the way that each entity has tools and solutions that are great, right? They're really, really nice enterprise tools, but there is no thread that combines and connects those two pieces together, and allowing for that data to be democratized and flow so that more thoughtful analysis can go into it, so that you can elevate the conversations and the analysis so that you can drive better outcomes is where we get really passionate.
Do you think, because I used to work for a carrier, that was my first role out of college. So, I sort of, and I've been doing this for 15 years now. So it's very embedded in the insurance industry, and culturally, and it's similar to my industry, in the recruitment industry. Culturally, the USP you had as a carrier was your own, ring fence data set, right? All the information you had was your USP. It was, and there's still clearly unique data sets in every carrier, but that is getting eroded away by, third party data sources, sharing of data. Has that, the acceptance of kind of the need for a sort of open view on data. I'm sort of trying to get at, could your business have existed 10 years ago? I know you've been around since, I think, 2015, and I think originally it was WatchTower benefits, but I can't see as 10 years ago you being able to have that sort of openness towards data. Do you think that's fair?
I think a little bit. I think the openness of data that we have is, if in the employee benefits business, fundamentally, the insurance carriers are assessing the risk of that employer, right? And there's core elements to that risk package that they need to review, which primarily is the plan, the policy to be insured, the population of individuals to be insured, and then the underlying claims experience if the group is of a certain size. And those three things together equal risk package. And what we learned and what I experienced on the carrier side was that carriers and brokers are trying to share this information so that they can do a thorough review and analysis of that risk package. And so one piece that we realized was you actually accelerate even large players by a considerable amount if you just improve that exchange as a fundamental 101 thesis of how about we just flow this information back and forth in a more easy and streamlined way. That, I think, didn't and wouldn't have a problem 10 years ago. I think the macro trend of adoption of systems and tooling and tech was something that would have been a problem 10 years ago. And so I think the advent of that has really been assistive to our business in understanding, imagine what we could do if we had a better way in which to receive this information, to analyze risk, to price risk, and then to ultimately place risk, and then grow a block of risk over time. And that's where we've seen real large carriers leaning in, because they don't see it as much of a, well, this is democratizing and a threat to me in some way. It's actually an accelerant to my business. And that's where they think about this from both a new business acquisition standpoint, as well as from a in-force block. These are multi-billion-dollar blocks of business that they're managing. And that's material for them in terms of how they think about that data flow. And so that's how we're observing it. And I think, again, the advent and leaning in on the use of technology 10 years ago, that would have been hard to do it. And then just basically seeing dollars be put to work for API development and things like that. A number of years back, it would have been like an aspirational digital strategy, but we didn't see it manifest in real dollars being put to work. And that's happening today. And that's a really, really exciting macro trend that we're seeing in the benefits business particularly.
Yeah, I mean, interoperability is a popular topic in other industries. Healthcare is obviously one of them. We touched on the role it plays there, but sort of more broadly, what role does it play in today's insurance market? Because I definitely think this is siloing that we love to do in insurance. We love specialization and siloing, and that doesn't work in this world. So, what part does it have to play?
So to us, it is a fundamental tenet of what the employee benefits should be. It's still an aspirational statement, because interoperability does not exist yet within the US sort of domestic employee benefit market. But we believe very deeply, and I believe very deeply, on the point of view that if you imagine how this information would flow through a true journey of interoperability, what you're able to do is really unlock all of these new elements to the business that are really, really exciting. And so if you imagine the journey all the way through of an employer in purchasing, renewing, analyzing, placing again, or changing carriers, and then how that all ultimately maps down to their employees and their purchase experience. If you remove those silos and those gates, you actually accelerate the whole process. And I would argue you benefit everyone, including all of the suppliers that are trying to sell into that value chain. And what we have observed is that a lot of the technology investment within the employee benefits business has been after the employer makes a sale purchase. So I'm going to choose this health plan. I'm going to choose this dental plan. I'm going to choose this disability plan. Let me make sure I'm setting up my employees effectively so that they can make good choice. I think where we're attacking and the what we can do in terms of this whole journey is that pre-sale decision, which is the manufacturing and packaging of, well, what am I choosing? What is the best plan for my employees? What's the best structure for me to consider? And then let's remove the gate for that information to flow all the way through. And that gets really exciting, especially when you think about the generational flip that's happening in the US in particular, where you've got this whole generation that's retiring, and there's a new generation of workers that are demanding a different experience in terms of product construction within their employee benefit compensation package. And by removing some of those gates and allowing this to really flow through, you actually give yourself a real chance to be creative around how do I bring new solutions, whether it's a mental wellness product or a financial wellness product, or it's a family planning product, all the way through to market. And we're emboldened in that position because you start to then get to that point where you can really think about a better future of how does this operate and really harness the energy of wonderful people in the business, but they're a little constricted right now based off of the siloed nature of how all that information lives.
I was just thinking as well while you're saying that, it's the classic sort of talk about the flow, the ease of use, and just a better job that you're enabling employers to do towards their employees, because they've got time, they've got access to data, so they can feed back and communicate more effectively, so you can compete. Because that's what always resonates with me when we're talking about benefits. As you can imagine, the last 2 years, as someone that works in the executive search space, there's been lots of talks about what the benefits packages look like, and it's not compensation, it's that benefits need to be different. I mean, actually on that, I wondered what it's been a very specific point in time that we're having this conversation after sort of a very unusual couple of years. There's been a shift towards working from home. Have you seen that? How has that impacted the benefits space? Are we seeing demands for different types of benefits, for example?
I think a little bit. It still remains fairly insulated, in my opinion, based off of how much change are we seeing. I think there is a lot of discussion. We're not seeing as much conversion into action in terms of purchases or variations of purchases being made in terms of our lens that we see. We support right now a segment of the US population that are employer groups that are in sort of the mid to large size category that have been pretty stable. They didn't go through dramatic fluctuation during the pandemic, and they have not gone through dramatic fluctuation as part of the post-pandemic or pseudo post-pandemic, and then in this sort of great resignation phase. So they've been fairly stable, but we have seen a real advancement in the evaluation of the category that we're sort of talking about as the emerging product category, which is all of these new behavioral health, mental health, depending on how you think about the categorization and the bucketing of them, really, really cool, interesting products and services that are being offered. And what we observe is that a number of these are starting, but then they're trying to figure out, how do I make my message heard to the market within the employee benefits world, because brokers and carriers have such close connection that you really need to get your way into the brokerage side of the market if you want to have a material expansion in terms of who's using your service or who's using your product. So we're seeing the early phases of that, but I still think it's on the front end. It hasn't been something that has been experienced over the last couple of years within the benefit space, at least to date.
Because it's something that I've been conscious of, because we've had a couple of guests on the podcast. You know, I know a few businesses. I mean, and I think about the sort of distribution strategies. You know, we've got Armadillo that we came on here that do a home warranty subscription, and one of their methods of distribution is healthcare for the home, and the rationale behind that being, we're now working from home. You know, those things that didn't concern you about warranty on your home now become a problem because you're there so often. And I think it's interesting because it started to get me think, now I'm at home every day, working from home. I mean, this is my business, but we probably certainly won't have a kind of fixed location every day. At best we'll have a flexible setup. And that means as an employer, I have to start thinking much more creatively about, well, what's important? Even things like gym structures. There's no point having a one location gym, so that means I go towards gym pass or something like that. And obviously the mental health thing, I think, hugely important as well. We're missing that awareness of our employees every day because we're not seeing them every day. So I think it's an interesting period of time, but yeah, it does feel very grassroots, and it's interesting to hear you say that, because obviously you have a much better lens on this. Going back to the beginning,
there has been a couple. I would say there's been a couple product segments within benefits that historically I think had just kind of flattened out a little bit, and so your traditional, I'd put the traditional voluntary and worksite benefits in that category, and we have seen them actually have a pretty good push. So if you take a product like a critical illness product or a hospital indemnity product, I think as you've seen employers migrate to the high deductible health plans, and you've got this gap, maybe a $4,000 or $5,000 deductible, where now it's ultimately on the family to cover that first $5,000. There has been a really nice use case for these products that had historically sat over a little bit on the shelf, partially because of the way that they were just distributed. And so we're seeing actually that not net new product segment, but actually get a bit of a resurgence in terms of the amount of demand that we're seeing from what we know very deeply, which is our network of brokerage side, which represents really the employer demand. And so we're seeing a pretty nice spike on that. And I think if you overlap that with the macro trends of what's happening with obviously the pandemic, there were times more frequently maybe that people were utilizing hospital services, et cetera. And so they're now seeing correlated value to that. The other piece that I think has been interesting with that segment is those carriers in particular have been more mindful about how do we actually help claims get paid faster and easier. Whereas there was always this sort of conception that that market had a really, really low payable claim rate because there was lack of awareness even at the policyholder level that you had this policy in place because it was embedded within a couple different segments. And actually, I give them a lot of kudos for being thoughtful on how could I pull forward health claims, because then I can identify if it's a hospital indemnity product. I know very clearly if you were an inpatient in a hospital, and I can use that data dump to actually kick out forward a payment of that claim. And so I think that's a really great signal of the industry of trying to be more consumer friendly, to understand that this is actually a nice supplemental plan that can come in and roll with a underlying high deductible health plan. So we have been seeing that more so in the last couple of years than we did the few years prior, which I think is a really positive signal to the business.
I think that's such a key shift in the way that all businesses are having to look at themselves now. In to say culturally, the insurance industry has a bad rep, kind of outside of the insurance industry. Like if you don't work in the insurance industry, if you read any mainstream press, I was reading an article this morning, and they love latching on to resistance to pay claims. And actually, if you speak to anyone in insurance, it's like, no, we want to pay claims as quickly as possible because it's the biggest cost to us. We just want to challenge those claims that we have concerns about, or we're worried about fraud, or even just they're large enough and complex enough that they deserve investigation. But most of the kind of push towards this. But I think it's interesting how much I do feel that's a cultural shift that's happened in the time that I've been in the industry. That proactivity, but it's the evolution of our ability to see that data clearly and quickly. And it wasn't possible before. It's funny. I'm smiling because I'm thinking about I have just moved from an office, and I was thinking, why haven't I made my refund? And they were, oh, you haven't asked for it. I was like, why do I have to ask for it? I'm not there anymore. Like, just pay it back to me. But as we talk, I think the insurance business is making great strides, and you can look at the more sort of slightly more complex versions of like parametrics, but the trend is towards let's pay things as automated as possible, as quickly as possible, and that availability of data, particularly in in things like healthcare claims or related claims should be pretty transparent and quick and easy if you can make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think
yeah.
that I think one of the challenges that the benefits business has had, if you compare this to the P&C commercial business in the States, is that they have been slower to adopt how they're using and letting information flow for these types of purposes, right? Whether it's I want to pay a claim faster, whether it's I want to use information to make better decisions. And I think what we're seeing is an acceleration of that within benefits, which is really inspiring, because there has been a considerable delta. You go to an insurance conference and you talk to the ways in which the P&C marketplace is using information and passing information. They're talking about, and insurance for droids and things like that. And then you reflect on benefits, and like, I can't even. People are emailing stuff back and forth and like typing things by hand. So there is this idea where there was a substantial gap between just the methods to which they're thinking about information and engaging. And I have had firsthand observation of seeing that shift. And I think that will really help drive how we're thinking holistically around what decisions an employer's making to offer the best benefits for their employees, full stop, right? And that is a really easy thing to say. I want to do the best job I can. But if you start to peel that back and say, okay, now what goes into that process? It's really hard. It's really hard because of a whole bunch of inputs and reasons. And as you start to loosen the reins on access to information and unlocking what I call the intelligence layer of the business, you really can start thinking creatively around structure. Again, whether that's on the health side, whether it's on the ancillary side, whether it's within sort of the other core employee benefit package piece of it. And I think we'll continue to see that over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And we're super excited to be part of that, because we like seeing and pushing that forward to say, hey, well, what if you could actually not be tied to data that was too lagged or too macro or some different version? What if it was contemporary? What if you could understand that in real time? How would that change your conversation with an employer if you're a broker? Or how would that change your conversation with a broker if you're a carrier? And we're seeing that happen in real time, which is exciting.
You observed a really interesting trend there, I think, and something that I've just seen. And my world was commercial P&C. That's where I started my career, and that's where I spent most of my time. Because, if you work in insurance recruitment and you have my accent and you live in funnily enough, in the UK, then you're going to probably do it in London and work with the Lloyd's market, because it's the best market to work in. And obviously benefits isn't quite as big a business over here. But just watching that lag, we saw lots of kind of very marketable, exciting new entrants into the market. And I always see the sort of phases of, lots of direct to consumer stuff, but the more obvious and accessible from an outsider's perspective. So if you're coming into the insurance industry from outside the insurance industry, from tech, for example, you're going to know what travel looks like and home and motor because you've seen it. So it was no surprise we started there. Then we started to see more complex P&C solutions, whether it be digital trading or things like that. And now it's kind of come up the value chain, and we're starting to see complex reinsurance solutions. Companies like Supersea, for example. But I think benefits fits in that same category of it's a world in its own. It's complex from a insurance point of view, as in it's big carriers with big employers with big brokers or brokers, and so unless you're in that world, you don't care about it. So it doesn't get that investment of technology. It doesn't get that outside person coming in and going, I'm going to tackle this. And I think that's borne out by your career. I wonder whether this could only have been created by a team of people that come from the industry, I would imagine. That would be my viewpoint on it. Do you think that's fair to say?
A couple things I've learned. Starting a business is really hard. Growing a business is really hard, and doing so effectively is on a consistent way over time is really hard. And I think the fact that we knew the business better than most was an advantage that we had that allowed for us to get through some some pathways early in the journey of our career that we probably wouldn't have been able to get through if we didn't know the business as intimately as we do. Yeah. And so I think it's certainly possible, but I always appreciate when we meet with executive leadership within the business, within the benefit space, and in the conversation there is an acknowledgement to Threeflow knowing the space deeply, and saying like, and having appreciation to that, because what it informs us is how do we help drive better, more meaningful value quicker. And so we believe that that's really true. So I think it's possible. It would be a lot more challenging, I think, to understand the idiosyncrasies and the nuances of the business if you didn't have someone on your team that had lived and breathed in those moments. And I think especially early for us when we were building and we had the first crappy version of the thing that we're trying to sell, but we can still say like, but you know what happens here, this is where it falls off and this is where errors happen, or this is the part where you have to spend a whole bunch of time that doesn't generate a bunch of value, and we can carry them through what that looks like. And we had some really, really wonderful partners early that believed in that better future. Now we're at a point where the system is using that information to help drive their business forward in terms of a value standpoint. It's really encouraging. So I think it would have been really hard. And as we consider the growth of the business, it's also something we really value deeply, and part of how we recruit. And we have this really fun formula within Threeflow, which is a blend of deep domain and deep technologists. And a lot of our domain folks actually didn't know much about just like core tech, and a lot of our technologists didn't know much about insurance. And watching that formula sort of like bleed and blend over is really, really inspiring to watch. Watching folks or maybe a Blue Cross Blue Shield underwriter that's getting exposure to how does machine learning work. It's just like really, really cool and interesting. And that's something that we'll continue to harness the energy on as we grow.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's an exciting opportunity for people coming from both sides. That learning experience is why to do it, and you can see that. I mean, like my modus operandi is bringing people from with the insurance. I do the insurance part of the insurtech, so I'm bringing that usually to tech-driven businesses, and that is why people want to go. They go, right, I know everything about, within reason, about my sort of underwriting specialism. I want to know how that works in a algorithmic driven environment, for example, or machine learning environment, or I want to know how to create product, and that's what I think is this exciting thing for people that are kind of in the incumbent industry. I wanted to actually, I was just before I do that, I want to take it right back. So you were WatchTower benefits at the start. Is that correct? What is I understand why the name change, and why names are important. And I smile when I'm saying this as a man that's founded 3 businesses, and getting the name thing is like, it's one of the most fun bits, frustrating bits, and kind of ridiculous bits that you obsess about. So I'm intrigued about why that happened, or why you felt it needed to happen.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons and a couple drivers to it. One of the things that we observed as we were growing the business when we were still WatchTower was that we were building something net new in terms of a new category of enterprise software within the employee benefit insurance industry. And what we knew we needed was to be a little bit more intentional in defining that category of software that we're building. And absent doing that, what happens is that you get then just bucketed into different shoeboxes of where do you fit. And we observed that was something we were having conversations around a lot of, well, I'm not this, I'm not that. And it was sort of the counter anti-definition. And so we did understand very, very clearly that we needed to be intentional about defining that category and then naming what that category is. And so we did that with naming the benefits placement system as a category. And as the Ben admin system was a category that was created, we are creating the benefit placement system category. With that, there was also a need to be intentional about the naming convention of the business. And when we were WatchTower, there was an idea, part of the thesis was this idea of an elevated observation point, right? That you've got an ability to understand how data and information is flowing and how business is ultimately flowing. Well, we realized that as the name was sort of in consideration, to be evaluated, this idea of information flowing between was the core thesis. And so when we talk about Threeflow, we talk about it in the context of broker, carrier, and employer, and those being the three. And over time, the broker and employer are the two fixed units, and you could actually move carrier to be other stakeholder within the industry. And so what we liked was there was a rebrand moment of the company, but also a introduction of the category of software that we're building. And so we pulled this together in sort of a big bang moment to do both at the same time, and have been really pleased with the outcome. Right now, we can be more intentional about planting that flag of what are we and what is it, and giving it a name, and then defining what is it to be, what are the definition requirements to be considered a benefits placement system, and then certainly establishing ourselves as a leader in that space.
Yeah, that's much more intentional than for some of the stuff that I've named. The insurance industry has generally been underserved by technology. Why do you think that is? Because I think your solution is so, and I mean this is the greatest compliment, as it's obvious, it's an obvious need, and that's what's always so surprising. And I think all the best ideas are, it's like so obviously needed. But why do you think we've been underserved by technology? From someone that's come from that industry.
I think I'd probably pivot that answer into I think that's always had a lot of really good investment in tech, but I think it's been a little misguided in terms of where those dollars were allocated.
Sure.
If you look at, and this from the P&C business, if you look back at some of the original big investors in technology, it was the insurance business all the way back to the 70s, where they're making big investments. But I think what happened was that investment, especially on the carrier side, that happened early. And then the outcome was many of these carriers built these big monolithic systems where they just bolted on top of each other. And so what happened over time is it became really, really challenging to think about how could I modernize that stack so that I could work better with my external parties. And we observed that. I saw that when on the carrier side, there was a huge revamp of quoting and rating and policy admin systems. And those are big, multi-$100 million kind of investments for some of these carriers. And so I think there was investment in tech, but it was very much focused on solving for the me problem and not solving for the industry problem, because they built all these siloed containers. And so I think they used tech and they spent money on tech. They would tell you they spent a whole bunch of money on tech. I would argue that they didn't get their best bang for their buck in terms of where they were spending money. And so the outcome was this very siloed world that the benefits industry lived in, some of it intentional, some of it not intentional, as far as the way in which it's constructed. And so I think what's happening now is the carriers in particular are trying to figure out, how do I unpack into a new digital strategy that actually allows for me to work more effectively with external constituencies? And so we're seeing carriers either do a full rip out and rebuild, or they're trying to build sort of wrappers around it, whether it's a Salesforce wrapper, or whether it's other systems or solutions that try to act as that conduit layer in between their core systems and external. And then a lot of these carriers have been acquisitive over the last number of years, right? So you buy 2 or 3 carriers and you've got, thousands, if not tens, if not hundreds of thousands of underlying corporate clients that are built on one chassis. And then now you're trying to merge those 2 chassis together. Are you bringing it over to one, to the other, or are you moving something to net new? And so these carriers they're in these moments, I think, in terms of their evolution and journey, that there's some real big dollars at play. And now they're trying to figure out, how do I most effectively allocate those dollars? It's the classic buy versus build kind of scenario that we're seeing, especially with the quoting and rating engine and the policy admin systems. And those are key drivers to their business. And we'll see how that maps on to go forward. But I think historically their dollars were allocated. I think they just spent them at least a little bit in the wrong spot. And that just the advent of it was everything lived in its own little bucket. And that was the thing you'd said, sort of, it's obvious about what we're building, we do believe it was the item that was hiding in plain sight. Is you need a system that allows for these parties to work together and collaborate more deeply together. And you have to share the data. It's got to be a shared system. Otherwise, if I'm working on one data set and you're working on a different data set, that's where errors happen. And that's what we saw over and over and over again based on our experience when we were on the carrier side.
Yeah, hiding in plain sight is a perfect example. That's the dream challenge, I think, in any industry. Big enough. Because obvious also doesn't mean easy as well. I want to be clear that I certainly wasn't being disparaging. I think it's super smart. There's something there as well about people that we need to get to. Is like, that how do you get people to adapt to new tools, new processes? Because that's, I remember working I joined RSA straight from college. They had a new claims system. Getting people to use it was the challenge. It wasn't necessarily, I mean, there was problems with it as well, but it was changing people's kind of adoption. How do you go about trying to make that happen?
What we've learned is you need to be really intentional and actually quite formal in how you think about change management within the insurance business and for us within the benefits business. And what we needed to solve for was actually two sides of the system needed to go through a change management exercise. And something that we work really hard on every single day, which is how do we make sure that each side, each constituency understands that we're driving towards this better outcome and better solution. And what we needed is making sure that you have real champions in that moment. So for us, when we bring on a new brokerage entity, that is a really, really core and fundamental part of our discussion with that brokerage firm, that there is executive sponsorship at the top level, as well as sort of an organic grassroots from the bottom up understanding of why we're doing this, because there is some net new change for them. And that's a real thing. And that's obviously a core human element of, please don't move my cheese. And I get really worried if you do. And so we have to be really intentional about how do we make sure that we're supporting that journey and process. And we've learned that we actually need to construct a fairly formal sort of journey for that entity and those individuals to go through. And then that carries through on the carrier side. And that was and continues to always be one of the biggest challenges that you deal with when you're working in like a really deeply entrenched business, when you've got two stakeholders that have known each other for 10, 15, 20 years, and then you introduce a new way to allow those two parties to work together better. And initially, there's going to be one of those sides that will say, well, I don't know if I believe that to be true. And so you have to really prove that. And we've understood that formalizing what that engagement looks like is really, really critical. But it's an ongoing challenge. It's not a light switch, and once it's there, everyone feels like this is the best way ever. You have to really focus on that and make sure that the value drivers are clear, and that you're supporting those two entities to understand that this actually helps their business operate better, and you're with them to support through the journey. And so when we think about our team and how we recruit in, especially for those that have had insurance experience in the domain, it's those individuals that get like so excited, they're giddy about this better future, because they've lived and breathed in the muck and mire that is the way it worked before. And now that they get inside the walls of Threeflow and see kind of what is today and where we're going tomorrow, and they get really, really excited and emboldened about being able to share that story with our broker community and our carrier community. And that's really fun and encouraging for them to be able to lean into that moment, because it's so rooted in their own experience. And that's been really fun for us culturally. One of our values is pushing boundaries, and that's a core element to this change management. Is you're going to hit walls and edges all the time, and we need to be really thoughtful and mindful about how do we help carry people through that, so that they can see, hey, I'm going to point you to something that is different, and different is scary, but that also can unlock all these better future moments and opportunities.
It's so unique, the insurance industry, that a lot of the work that we do, sales, partnerships, there's a tendency, I think, if you have technology first founders, there tends to be a push towards SaaS type salespeople. And I think when you have insurance first founders, they're like, no, you're better taking that person from the industry, teaching them how to sell in a sort of technology context, or teach them how to build partnerships in a technology-driven business context. Because sitting there saying, I think this is a good idea for you, Mr. New or Mr. and Mrs. New Client, because I've sat where you're sat. I know the challenges you're faced with, and this is why it's a good idea. And having that validity of sitting on that side of the fence, it's so important. And of course it can talk, but you and I will have purchased technology for our own businesses, and we're talking to someone who's selling it to us, and you realize that they're regurgitating why they as a business think this is a good idea. But you kind of almost need to have that individual touch and go, I've sat where you're sat, and I know why this is good.
Right.
Yeah.
And what we liked about the formula that we've actually found to work really well was, as we were thinking about our sales leadership, we actually intentionally recruited someone that did come from more of the enterprise SaaS sort of background. Mm-hmm. And if you complement the frame and the formalization that can come with what you're just talking about in terms of how do I connect with you individually about experiencing that moment so I can help navigate you through it, that's been a really nice formula for us, because then you pull from some of the wonderful learnings within the enterprise SaaS businesses, right? And how do I think and formalize the way in which our go-to-market motions go? But then the touch to the client has this genuine moment of, no, I was right there. I lived what you're living. And so let me help you with that moment, because I can see how getting you through this is going to lead to better outcomes for your business. And that has been a really fun unlock for us. And we've been really intentional as far as the team architecture in that sort of way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think that is the perfect version of a team with a business like this is having that strategic leadership that comes from enterprise SaaS, and then the complement of the sort of coal face of the interaction with the clients from the insurance knowledge. It's a conversation I have a lot. It's a sort of ubiquitous question about where do you blend that, as we were saying earlier, where do you blend the technology and the insurance, and you don't want too much of either, really. You need to understand culturally that you're a technology business, but you serve the insurance industry, and so having that kind of right mix is absolutely crucial. I'm really conscious of your time, and certainly thank you for your patience, because we've had a few tech issues. For those people who aren't watching, we've lost camera a few times on me, so it's no disaster.
We did it together.
But we got there. But really conscious that you've done very well at raising in an environment just before it's tightened up a little bit. What's the plan for you this year? I know we're sort of halfway through. Lots of growth, new territories, or is it just doubling down on success so far?
Yeah, we've been quite fortunate in terms of the capital partners that we've had as part of the Threeflow team, whether it was our board of Equal Ventures and Emergence Capital and Excel, have been really, really wonderful partners, both from obviously the financing standpoint, but I would argue more importantly about if you're picking partner, what does that actually mean? And I've been fortunate to have selected some really, really wonderful partners that are supportive of the business and understand kind of the vision of where we're headed. And that's been really inspiring to obviously have that career partners around the table. So I'm always appreciative of that. As we think about the sort of financing landscape for us, obviously the macro economic environment has changed things a little bit in terms of what was the feeling and sentiment of the market in the fall or sort of late summer to what it feels like today. Thankfully, Threeflow's in a good position in terms of our current capitalization state. So I think realistically, our focus for this year is going to be executing on what we like to refer to as our Super Bowl season, which is kicking off right now. Q3 for us is the highest volume quarter for us because most of the employee benefit contracts renew on a January 1 cycle. So everyone is heads down focusing on making sure that these next couple of quarters go really effectively for Threeflow. And then what we typically observe is the second half of the year for Threeflow is our opportunity to consider both meaningful expansion to the software of the business, so expanding the system itself, as well as considering additional product verticals or categories. And so we will we'll be digging into that in the second half of the year, so that as we consider and unveil any new products next year, that's going to happen, really in the first half, because we go through the same cycle within each calendar year of, if you launch something, you've got that launch must occur in the first half so that you can educate the market, go through any change management. And then the second half is really the execution. And then the end of the year is kind of planning. And so for us, that's our focus right now, is making sure that we're executing on the remainder of this year. But we have a lot in store and coming up that are in early phases of sort of R&D and build, and we're super excited about what the future will bring.
That's amazing. Ryan, thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting conversation and a timely one for me, because things are sort of hotting up in the benefit space generally. So an education piece, if nothing less. But I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being a guest on the Leadership in Insurance podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thank you.